In the summer of 2023, a 71-year-old widow named Linda walked out of her home in Buckeye, Arizona, and tried to start her car. The engine clicked once and went silent. No neighbor within walking distance, no sidewalk to cross, no bus stop within 35 miles, grocery store 4 miles away, pharmacy 6. She owned the house outright and could not get a carton of milk. Linda could be anyone you know. She could be your mother, your grandmother, your neighbor from 3 subdivisions over. Because what happened to her is not a Buckeye story, it is an American suburb story, and it is playing out in some version in thousands of communities across the country right now. Here is the argument up front. The American suburb was engineered by a specific set of rules written between 1916 and 1980. Those rules made car ownership mandatory, destroyed the financial math of local governments, eliminated the social fabric that used to hold communities together, and created an infrastructure system now reaching the end of its lifespan with no money to replace it. The design was always going to produce this outcome. The bill just took 80 years to arrive. Let's start with the rules. In 1916, Berkeley, California, created the first explicit single-family-only zoning district in American history. The stated purpose was to prevent a black-owned dance hall from opening in a white residential neighborhood. Within that defined area, only one building type was legal, the detached single-family home. No apartments, no corner stores, no duplexes, no mixing of anything. 10 years later, the Supreme Court heard Euclid versus Ambler Realty. The village of Euclid, Ohio had passed an ordinance separating residential, commercial, and industrial uses. A real estate company sued. The court ruled 6-3 in favor of Euclid. Justice Sutherland's written opinion argued that mixing land uses caused fire hazards, traffic problems, and, in his exact words, nervous disorders in children. That decision is still the law of the land 100 years later. Every American suburb built since 1926 exists within the legal framework that ruling created. Then came the housing crisis of 1945. 16 million veterans came home needing homes that barely existed. Congress passed the GI Bill with low-interest home loans. The Federal Housing Administration insured 30-year mortgages with tiny down payments. A Long Island builder named William Levitt looked at 4,000 acres of potato fields and built a factory that produced one complete house every 16 minutes. By 1951, his development had 17,447 houses and more than 80,000 residents. Every sales contract included a racial covenant prohibiting resale to anyone who was not white. Levittown, New York is still 88.9% white as of the 2020 census. The template was set and it spread across the country almost immediately. The last piece was the roads. The 1956 Interstate Highway Act was funded at 90% federal, 10% state. Transit projects, by contrast, had to be funded almost entirely at the local level. That single asymmetry, which has barely changed in 70 years, ensured that every suburb built after 1956 would be designed around the car. The United States currently allocates roughly 11% of its federal infrastructure budget to rail and transit. European countries allocate roughly 40%. The result was a country that physically cannot function without a car. And that spent the next 70 years building more of itself on that same assumption. In 1947, Columbus, Ohio added one more rule that sealed the design: mandatory off-street parking minimums. Within 20 years, every city in America had copied it. A bar in Houston was required to provide one parking space for every 71 square feet of floor space. A church in Bellevue, Washington, required a parking space for every 4 seats in the sanctuary. UCLA economist Donald Shoup spent his career studying parking and concluded these requirements were, in his exact phrase, pseudo-science. The numbers had no empirical basis and were copied from one city's ordinance to the next without verification. His estimate, the total land value of all parking in the United States exceeds the value of all the cars it stores. In Harris County, Texas, there are at least 3 parking spaces for every registered vehicle, which is more land than the county uses to house the people who own those cars. The parking minimums also made walkable commercial streets physically illegal. To meet the requirements, buildings had to be set back from the sidewalk behind surface lots. A tiny neighborhood pub serving 8 people at a counter was illegal in most American suburbs. Not because of the pub, but because of the parking the zoning code demanded it bring along. The financial consequences of this system are now the reality of municipal budgets. Charles Marone, an engineer in Minnesota who founded the nonprofit Strongtown, spent years calculating the life cycle economics of suburban development. His method was simple: total infrastructure cost divided by total property tax revenue over the development's life. The answer was almost always the same. The infrastructure lasts about 30 years before it needs major maintenance. The taxes do not cover that maintenance. Every subdivision was losing money over its full life cycle every single year. Marone called this the growth Ponzi scheme. The early years look great because the infrastructure is new and the revenues are flowing. Cities use those revenues to cover deferred maintenance on older subdivisions, and to pay for the old ones, they keep approving new ones. As long as growth continues, the math holds. The moment it stops, the math breaks. A detailed analysis of one Tennessee city found that wide-lot single-family streets generated a long-term deficit of $32,627 per home. Townhouse developments on narrower lots generated a surplus of $5,143 per lot. Dense mixed-use commercial blocks generated even more. The conclusion was the same one every Strongtown's analysis reaches. Sprawl produces deficits and density produces surpluses, and the deficit grows worse with every passing decade as the infrastructure ages. Stockton, California, filed for municipal bankruptcy in 2012. Detroit followed in 2013, the largest municipal bankruptcy in American history. At their peak, the United States had roughly 2,500 enclosed shopping malls. By 2024, fewer than 700 remained healthy. Roughly 50 square miles of empty store space now sit on top of approximately 150 square miles of cracking parking lot that municipalities are still legally obligated to maintain. And while the malls collapsed, Dollar General expanded into 20,942 locations across 48 states as of February 2026, more locations than any other retailer in the country. Dollar General growing that fast is not a retail success story. It is a map of where grocery stores have closed and supermarket chains have declined to build. The human cost is just as measurable as the financial one. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration recorded 7,593 pedestrian fatalities in the United States in 2022, the highest figure since 1981. The European Union, with a population 34% larger, recorded approximately 3,714 pedestrian deaths the same year. The American per capita pedestrian death rate is roughly 2.7 times higher than the European rate. The cause is not that Americans are less careful crossing the street. The roads were built wide and fast, the sidewalks were left out, and the average American passenger vehicle has grown 10 inches longer, 8 inches taller, and 1,000 pounds heavier over the past 30 years. Texas expanded the Katy Freeway outside Houston to 26 lanes at a cost of $2.8 billion. Within 3 years of completion, morning commutes were 25 minutes longer than before the expansion. The phenomenon is called induced demand. More lanes attract more drivers, and the road fills up again. This has been documented in 100 major American metro areas. Between 1993 and 2017, the 100 largest American urbanized areas added 30,500 lane miles of freeway, a 42% increase. Traffic delays grew 144% over the same period. The road that was supposed to solve the problem never solved the problem. There are versions of this in every major American metropolitan area. The average cost of owning and operating a new car in 2024 was $12,297 per year. A typical two-car suburban household spends roughly $24,000 annually just to participate in the local economy. For a family earning $75,000, that is nearly a third of the total household budget consumed by automobile costs. Low-income households spend up to 30% of income on transportation. By 1913, more poor people lived in suburbs than in American cities, with suburbs accounting for 56% of the poor population in the 95 largest metropolitan areas. That population grew 3 times faster than urban poverty between 2019 and 2022. The design that worked well for the affluent two-car family of 1965 is now failing, the people who can least afford for it to fail. There is also something harder to measure but equally real. A functional neighborhood has what sociologists call a third place. Not home, not work, but somewhere in between. A corner cafe, a library, a plaza, a park bench where you might run into someone without planning to. In the American suburb, the third place has been zoned out of existence. When you cannot walk to a corner store and there are no sidewalks to encounter a neighbor on, social interaction becomes a scheduled, curated event. You stop encountering people, you visit them. The research on loneliness consistently shows its highest concentrations in the places most thoroughly organized around car dependency. The design did not just isolate people from services, it isolated them from each other. The reform movement is real, and it is moving faster than most people realize. Between July 2024 and June 2025, more than 30 states passed at least one pro-housing law. In 2025 alone, 102 pro-housing bills were signed into state law. The count in 2023 was 30. Minneapolis eliminated single-family-only zoning in 2018. Rent growth in Minneapolis subsequently ran 16 to 34% lower than in comparable cities that kept the old rules. Japan's National Zoning Code, passed in 1968, works on the opposite principle from American zoning. Every zone permits lower impact uses by default. The strictest residential zone in Japan allows single-family homes, small shops, medical clinics, and daycares. There is no zone in Japan that bans housing entirely. Tokyo housing prices in inflation-adjusted terms have been roughly flat for 30 years. American prices in comparable cities have tripled. Carmel, Indiana, provides the American case study. A Republican mayor named Jim Brainerd spent 28 years replacing traffic signals with roundabouts, building 152 of them. Carmel's traffic fatality rate is 2.25 per 100,000 residents on a 5-year trailing average. The national average is 12. He did it in a red state using market mechanisms and public-private partnerships, which proves something useful. The physics of what makes streets safe does not change based on which party controls the city council. So why did American suburbs ruin America? Because they were built on rules that made cars mandatory, made walkable neighborhoods illegal, made the financial math unsustainable, and made it politically almost impossible to change any of it, since the homeowners whose wealth depends on the system staying exactly as it is are the most motivated voters in local politics. The infrastructure is aging at the rate the engineers predicted. The groundwater under Buckeye is depleting at the rate the hydrologists modeled. The Reform Coalition is assembling at a pace that would have seemed impossible 5 years ago. And Linda is still sitting in that driveway. The design produced her. It produced your neighbor. It produced millions of Americans who own their homes and cannot survive in them without a car that works. The design can be changed. The only question is whether the political will arrives before the arithmetic does.